Started with our log cabin style pillow cover. We are going to have a 13.5 inch square piece of fusible fleece. I've got the bumpy side up, and the bumpy side has the glue on it, so we want to make sure that that's the side that we are attaching the fabric. And then I just have a big pile of 2-inch strips. So I'm using strips off the bolt, so my pieces are all 44 to 45 inches wide. But this is a great project to use just scraps, things that you have left over from other projects. It's a really good scrap buster. So if you are going that route, then you just need to cut pieces that are 2 inches wide. Honestly, you could use other widths as well, but we're going to stick on this project with everything is 2 inches wide and then just various lengths. So if you are making this project in my class, you'll probably want to refer to the scoring guide to see if there are any requirements related to the color scheme that you use. I'm doing this kind of analogous color scheme with blues and greens, so colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. And it's likely that in class you'll have to do something like that also. If you were making this project just for fun, you could do whatever color scheme you would like. One of the things you do want to think about is with this design, with the log cabin, you're going to start with small pieces in the middle. So you'd have like a small piece here, and then you'd have a little bit bigger piece on all sides, and then a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. So if you are using scrap pieces to create your log cabin, you'll want to start with your smallest pieces, the pieces that you don't have as much of, in the center of the pillow. And then if you have like longer pieces, especially if you have some that are at least 13.5 inches long, then you could save those for that outer edge, which you'll need the longest sections. Depending on the circumstances that you're making this pillow, it is possible that you have an embroidery machine. So you could do some kind of embroidered piece, maybe with your monogram or something in the middle square, the center of it, that you build your log cabin around. Or another option you have would be something like this. This would be representing a fussy cut. Fussy cutting is sometimes done in quilting when you have a specific design that you want to showcase on your piece. So instead of just cutting the piece and sewing it down randomly, you select one section of the piece that you want to showcase. So in this example, it would be this little giraffe print. So if I wanted to do a fussy cut, I could trim out around the giraffe or around whatever shape it is that I want to have centered, leaving room for a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all sides. And then that would be what my design is built around. For today's project, I'm not going to do any fussy cutting. I'm just going to start with a center piece and build around that. But these are just some options that you could have if you're making this again. All right, I'm going to find the direct center of my square. So first I'm just going to fold it in half, and then I'm going to fold it in half again, and then just mark the point here. We'll see if it made a crease big enough for me to see it on the inside or where I'm going to, and it did. So I'm just going to put a little mark right there, and it doesn't have to be exact, because if you get close enough, it'll look just fine. But what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to start out with my first piece. So I'm going to just kind of fold it just to eyeball it, to lay it down where the crease would touch that dot that I just made. And then I'm going to open it up. So that's where my first piece is going to go down. And then I need to pick what my next piece is that I'm going to have sewn on top of that. So again, you might have some scraps. It's kind of a good idea to have a cutting utensil of some sort, some nice sharp shears, or I have my rotary cutter. I'm going to cut this first piece the same exact size as that one, okay? And we'll only do this on the first row. But now I just need to lay these two pieces right sides together, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam across one side. For the machines in our classroom, you'll want your sewing machine on a 2 where your needle is centered. And we're just going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to reduce my stitch length down to a 2, and I'm not going to need to backstitch. Okay, so we have our first piece on here. And what it'll look like, it's just like that. And then we'll be able to open it up and finger press it down. Okay, so 1/4 inch seam, open it up, finger press it down. All right, so next we need to decide which piece we're gonna put down next. And so there's so many options that you can choose from. I've decided to go with this kind of navy blue feather. And so basically what I need to do is just kind of lay it down where it's going to go. And I'm just going to use my shears to cut it about the same length. I can always trim it up more later. And then I'll lay it right sides together right there. And then I'll head back to the machine, do a 1/4 inch seam right across there. One thing you'll want to do as you go is just kind of keep up with trimming your threads and making sure that any of your excess fabric that was hanging off over the edge is trimmed up so that they're nice and even. I've already trimmed that up. You may also want to flip it over to the back and go ahead and trim up any long threads that you have, and just do that along the way. It'll keep things a lot nicer and neater. The next thing that we're going to do is decide what piece to go on next. I've already kind of decided on my pattern, and so here's an option for you. So as I open this up, I'm going to look at this as my center. We're basically, when you do a log cabin, you have your center square, or mine's a rectangle, your center piece, and you're going to build your pieces around it like that. So I started with the short side, then my next piece has to cover those two pieces. Now my next piece is going to go across this way, and it's going to cover these two pieces. What I've decided I'm going to do is for the first frame around that center block, I am going to do like a mirror of what's on the other side. So for this particular row, I'm gonna do this fabric again. Okay, so what I'll do then is I'll just lay that piece down. And now if you're not good at like just coming in here and trimming your piece down to make it the right size, you could always take a marker, like a fabric marker or a marking pencil, and go in after you finger press those pieces down. You can kind of go in with a marker there, and maybe you're more comfortable doing that. Okay, so I could then go in here and just trim that piece, then lay it down, and now I'm ready to go do my 1/4 inch seam. So we just sewed the 1/4 inch seam along here. Now I'll open this up, finger press it down, and you do want to try to make sure that it is completely smooth, no bumps or any lumpy areas. And so now I'm going to look at this pattern here, and it's going to go across this side over there. So again, I'm going to lay that down even with the edges, and then trim it even. Okay, and then I'm going to go sew a 1/4 inch seam right across there. So I trimmed into that a little bit. That'll be okay. It'll all get covered up. All right, so we just did this one. Now that completes that first full phase. Okay, so now you kind of decide on what you want to do next. Typically what you would do is you'd go back to where your starting point was. So I started with this center block, and then this was my very first piece. So now when I go with my next row around, that will be my starting point again. So I'm going to take this piece and lay it right sides together along this edge. Trim that piece up. Okay, and then I'll be ready to go do a 1/4 inch seam right along there. Now we will just continue to repeat the process until the entire block is filled all the way out to the edge. So you have now finished the cover, the quilting of the cover, and we just want to press it really, really well. And remember, you had started out with that fusible fleece, so there's going to be that glue that can now adhere to the back of the fabric. You need a really hot iron to do this. steam helps also. So we'll get it pressed down really well, and then we'll flip the block over, and we're gonna trim up, square up all of the sides, even with that original batting that we had cut, making sure that we end up with a 13.5-inch square. We need to have a 13.5-inch square in order to fit the 13-inch pillow form that we made in class. If you're making this project for something else, you could start with any other size pillow form that you already have. I like to take pillow forms that I've already used for a while and take the cover off and just put a new cover on it. So you could do the same technique using any size pillow that you need. And so the trick is, whenever you are covering the pillow, if you had a 15-inch form, you'll start with a 15-inch square on the front. If you have a 16-inch form, 16-inch square. So the math on that is really easy. Then we'll see in just a minute how to make the back for the cover as well. So it's a pretty easy project that you can replace pillow covers all year round. Do seasonal ones for different holidays, that type of thing. Okay, so this looks pretty well pressed. And now we can head over to trim up the edges and square it up. Alright, so first of all, you can just sit and admire all of your work. It looks so awesome, looks so cute. But then you'll want to flip it over to the back side, and you can just use that edge of your batting piece as your guideline. Now, if I were doing this for myself, I would take my quilting ruler and I'd use my rotary blade and I'd slice that off really fast. But I don't want to do that for everybody in class. If you're doing this at home or on your own, that's how I would suggest doing it. But for school purposes, you'll just stand at your table and take your nice sharp shears and trim off any excess fabric you have up to the edge of the fleece, and then just trim that off, square it up all the way around on all four sides. Now you're ready to make the back side of the cover. One thing I want to show you here is, like, right there, there's less than 1/8 of an inch of the fleece still showing. You do not need to sew an extra piece on to cover that up, but if you still had a pretty wide amount, let's see if I can get, like, if you had this much still showing, you might want to go ahead and add another piece there, but because that would all be covered up by your seam, you don't need to cover it. Alright, to make the back of the cover, you're going to have 2 pieces of fabric that are even with the width of the front. So this piece right here is 10 inches by 13.5 inches. And this one is 8 inches this way by 10.5. So they're even going across. They're just 2 different heights. What you need to do is flip the fabric over so that the wrong side is facing up. You're going to set your seam gauge to a 3/8. Okay, so that's the third line over on your seam gauge. You will fold one of the 14-inch sides over 3/8. Okay, actually started it too wide. There we go. So 3/8, and then we're doing a double turn hem. So I'm going to turn it over 1 time 3/8. And then I turn it again 3/8. Just press that down. And then just to hold it in the meantime, till I'm ready, I'm going to put a few pins in. I'm going to put the pins in perpendicular to the edge that I'm going to be sewing. So the edge I'm going to be sewing is right along this opening. Okay, so I want to put my pin heads on that side. Okay, then I'll set that aside and I'll repeat the same thing on my 8 by 13.5 inch piece. I kept saying 14, but it should be, this is 13.5 inches. That was the size of my finished pillow, okay? All right, to do our top stitch, I've got my machine still on a 2. You will see this stitch from the outside of your project, so you may want to take into consideration your thread color. I've just got this light blue, and it corresponds well with my color scheme. So because I have my machine on a 2, I'm gonna line the fold up with this little opening, this little groove. It's like a split. So there's a metal piece, there's a split, and then a plastic section of your presser foot. My fabric is gonna line up with the split. And if you need to know precisely where on the split to line it up, just line it up where the plastic begins. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and lower my needle, lower my presser foot, and just as I stitch along that edge, I'm gonna keep an eye on this area right here. Okay, so I want to keep it lined up. Okay, just to show you where that is, so here's the folded edge. It's down about 1/8 of an inch from that edge. Just showing you that if you happen to sew way up here, you're going to need to go back and sew down along the lower edge. Basically what that's doing is keeping it held in place. Repeat the process for the top stitch along your second piece, just as you did on the previous one. You're going to take your finished piece and you have to decide, what do you want the top and bottom to be, or top and bottom. I'm just going to keep mine with the way that it was the whole time. It really doesn't matter. You can turn your pillow whichever way, but these pieces are going to go on in a particular direction. So I'm going to start with my larger piece, and you should have that piece should line up across the width of the pillow. And we're doing this right sides together. So the bold side of the fabric is touching the top of the front of the cover. And now I'm going to have my second piece, and I've got that folded edge. Okay, it's going to overlap with the other folded edge I made, and we are going to line it up, and then we're going to pin all the way around. Now, this is kind of different from the pillow form that you made. When you made the pillow form, you had to leave an opening so that you could flip the pillow inside out. Well, for this project, this is the opening. We'll be able to stuff that whole pillow down inside of that space. Okay, so you don't have to leave an opening. You're going to pin all the way around, and then you're going to do a 1/4 inch seam all the way around the entire cover. Just to show you, I do have pins going in all the way around, and for this I am not going to pivot at my corners. I'm just going to start at one end, so 1/4 of an inch seam to the other end, and I'll do another seam from this end up, and I'll repeat that on all sides. Alright, so we've just stitched a 1/4 inch on all sides. I want you to flip it over to the back side where you can see your stitch lines. Just go in and make sure, if you were sewing with the top or the like I had the polka dots up while I was sewing, I just want to look for my stitch line to make sure that I caught all of that batting. What will happen sometimes is, especially in class, if you're not as experienced with sewing, you might end up sewing off the edge over here, and then when you flip your pillow inside out, you'd end up with a hole. Alright, the next thing we need to do is we need to clip the corners. I'm just going to do the straight across clip. I just want to make sure I don't cut into my actual corner seam, but I'm just going to cut off a little triangle point on all 4 corners. This will help me when I flip it inside out. It'll help me be able to press it easier and make it just have a nicer, sharper corner. Alright, so now you can go ahead and take that opening there. You're just going to flip the cover so that the right side is out. Okay, flip this bottom half down. Alright, and then you can use your finger first just to poke out the corners. You want them to be as pointed as possible. When that doesn't work, I usually have a metal loop turner in my classroom that I use, or you can close your shears, so you don't want them open where they're sharp, but close them up, and then you can stick those inside to poke out your corner. Oops. and do that on all 4 sides. Then you're going to head over and press it once those are all taken care of.